3, 2, 1. Ready?
So, hi guys. So this is a podcast that we're starting here in TRP. We're called The Sister Script, and it's going to be a podcast around a lot of different topics. This is the first one, and today we are going to discuss the gaps and blocks for women in recovery. For women in recovery, mothers in recovery. So my name's Donna, and I am a key worker here in TRP. And I'm joined today by my colleague, who's also a key worker in TRP.
Hey, I'm Linda, and I'm a key worker and project worker up here.
And we have the pleasure of Louise McCulla, who is a PhD researcher from Trinity College, and is actually doing quite a bit of work around this subject at the moment, around this topic. So do you want to tell us a little bit about it?
Okay, thanks Donna. I suppose my interest is mainly around mothers. I think the whole topic of women is really important, but for me, mothers in particular is important because a lot of feminist research would say that things have improved for women, but they haven't improved as much in society for mothers, and that it's really important that we recognise that there is a difference between women who are mothers to women who are, I suppose, women, because it brings its own challenges. So I'm really, really glad to be here today to talk about some of those challenges, and I suppose for me I probably will have that mother hat on. So
yeah, that's amazing, and thanks so much for being here, Louise. And I know we have done some pieces of research together. Sorry, I'm going to turn my phone off. Patrick, edit this bit out. Right. So we've been doing a little bit of research. You've been doing a lot of research
together.
And it's been a pleasure actually working alongside of you. What would be the biggest things that would have stood out to you through doing that piece of research?
I suppose it's really hard for me. I suppose I've worked in the addiction field for over 20 years, and what kind of saddens me is that I still see the same things coming up as I would have when I started working in the field. So I suppose I started working in Merchants Quay in like 2000, and it's actually 26 years ago, so a long time ago. And then I worked on research studies going around the country, meeting people when they entered treatment for the first time, and a lot of women who were mothers, and there was issue around childcare, there was issues around accessing doctors, there was issues around child protection. I would have worked in rehabilitation framework for a while, looking at pathways and actually working gaps and blocks, and I still see the same things now. So I suppose for me what really stood out is there's still the same issues around childcare, there's still the same issues around women being afraid to access treatment, things like that. But actually I think we're keeping things at a surface level, and that really we need to go deeper. So one of the things that I really appreciated in our group was that we talked about the need for empathy and understanding, that actually there's mindset shifts that need to change. It's not just about trying to push childcare, because stuff changes for a while, it might improve and then it goes back. I think there's a lot more that needs to happen, and the fact that stigma is still around so much, that really stood out to me as well.
And Louise, what is it that makes it keep going back? So every time that you take a couple of steps forward, it ends up back. What is that gap?
Definitely something that stood out to me is that I think sometimes change is dependent on people. And it's not formalised into structures. So things might change where you have a really good person at a community level who works to change things or pushes change to happen, and then they go, or they get moved, or something else happens, and people don't understand why something is the way it is, or people have different mind views. Maybe there's stigma and it all goes back, and that's not okay. Like, it needs to be, there needs to be structural change, but also I suppose structures are dependent on people understanding what's going on for women. So I think you need a mixture of both for change to really last and for it to be meaningful.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think as well, you know, in and around the stigma piece, I think that was one of the things when I came on board working on that research piece with you, Louise. It was that, you know, you were coming from a completely different angle that I really liked, and it was a lot of it was centered around, you know, hearing what the women had to say, and, you know, making it known that, you know, the women's voices are really important in this, you know, because sometimes that's all you need. You know, as a woman, sometimes all you need is for somebody to listen to you and say, I understand, you know. And
just actually to pick up on something there, I think it's really important that I think there's different there's different levels of change. I think that actually change needs to start with each of us.
Absolutely.
Like that actually it's what you be the change you wish to see. I love that kind of phrase.
So
and how do we be what we wish to see? Like and in our process, hopefully by being together, listening, creating those spaces, trying to witness things, I suppose you're creating hopefully a different culture that can grow and expand. Now maybe it will, maybe it won't, but I suppose all you can do is create those seeds, which is I think what our second report around that seeds of change from a wild garden, because I suppose if I pick up for a second on the wild, and I'm very conscious I'm talking a lot, but I really love this lady called Nora Bates, and she talks about like change, and I suppose change happens, I suppose, in the wildness of life, that like we can't mandate people to have empathy, we can't mandate people to do whatever, because when you do that, it's not necessarily, change may not be ready to happen, you're actually pushing things on people. It's like change happens in the wildness of life, and how are we ready to actually support those kind of processes? So I think there's something maybe around that as well.
Absolutely, and I think, you know, raising awareness in that, and I think we're doing that a lot better, you know, especially nowadays. Like I remember coming into recovery myself, and you know, there was I don't even think stigma is a hard enough word for it. It was a real shame, you know, that way you come in, you are ashamed to kind of say you're in recovery. It's not like that today, you know. I think it is those kind of barriers have been broken down a little bit, but yet still when it comes to women, and especially mothers in recovery, there still is that stigma, you know, and I think it's a lot of, you know, I've spoke to a few women, and there's loads of different reasons, you know, but it'll be things like, you know, what if Tussa take me children? Fear, you know, what will people think? I should be, you know, the perfect mother, or I should be, there's all of that kind of stuff, you know, and then you move forward, you know, and I actually know a lady, and she would have loved to access the day programme here, you know, and I think really would have benefited from it, but had special needs children. So the payment that she was on, she needed, you know, that way, but she would have lost the payment if she was to access the programme, you know, that way. So I think there's so many hurdles, and in my experience, when one is taken down, there's another one kind of waiting, you know, in its place, you know.
If it's all right to say something else, and I'm mindful I don't want to take over too much, but I think there's two things. I suppose one, I think we have to recognise that this is happening in Ireland, and one of the things we do have to recognise, in Ireland we have a history of how we have oppressed women and oppressed mothers. I mean, there was a marriage ban in Ireland where you had to give up your job until the 1970s.
That's right.
There was all of these things are only in the last 50 or 60 years, and there was an expectation that women would stay at home, would have children, and that was your piece. I think we had a referendum in Ireland, was it last year or the year before, where I suppose we didn't change the constitution, that it was expected that women's place is still within the home. So I still think we actually have a long way to go, I suppose, around women and mothers, and it's not that long ago that we still had mother and baby homes in Ireland and stuff as well. So I think there's a huge piece that needs to be looked at around mothers. I also really appreciate the way you brought up about all those different barrier after barrier, and you get one and another one comes up. And I think the problem sometimes with research is that it's these once-off pieces of research that happens without actually trying to change the processes around how lived experience gets built into it. Because if lived experience only happens at one point over here, we consult the person, but we're not actually engaging that feedback and that knowledge, because there's such wisdom and such insight and learning from lived experience that's not included right now, and that's not okay, because the barriers are only ever going to be what happened over here. But like you said, one thing gets addressed and something else comes up, and if those structures aren't happening, well then it's never going to, I suppose, be responsive to people.
Absolutely. And I think even, you know, around the lived experience, I think you're right, it is so important, and it kind of, if you follow through on that like that, and you're kind of reaffirming your voice is important, you know, that way we want to hear what you have to say. So I think you're right. I think it is extremely important, you know.
Could I say one other thing as well?
Walk away.
Sorry, I get really passionate about this topic.
I love that.
I suppose the other thing that I'm really mindful of is that I suppose, I don't know if you're familiar that there's a difference between motherhood and mothering. So motherhood is, there's expectations of how women should be as mothers, what they should do, and they're often things that are held at a societal level. And that's a sign, I suppose feminists would say, that's a sign that we exist in a patriarchal, very controlling society that works in that kind of top-down way. But there's a lot of feminists who would argue that we really need to support people, not around motherhood, but around mothering and empowered mothering, because mothering is actually the spaces of how we nurture and care for our children. How can we do that when we're maybe dealing with trauma, when we're dealing with poverty, when we're dealing with inequality, when we're dealing with different things that are going on? And I don't think we distinguish enough between those two things and actually create spaces to really support women and mothers in their mothering. And that's something that would come up a lot in the literature, that when mothers in recovery, where spaces are created for that peer-to-peer support, that it can actually be so beneficial to to be in your mothering, not spaces where you're judged and there's lack of understanding. That's motherhood, but I think that distinguishing between motherhood and mothering is really important.
I've never heard it like that before. It's actually really interesting. Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
So can I ask you, if you had a magic wand, right?
Yes.
And you could wave it now tomorrow, what would be the thing that you would want the most, change-wise?
I'd want spaces of listening, because I think that's at the core of a lot of things, and maybe there's a naivety there with that, because I suppose I also need to recognise that people hold power, so I do think that needs to be held in a space where there's accountability and there's governance. But I think stuff has to start with listening, and where we actually open and value, I think listening where we value different types of experiences, where we value lived experience, where we value hearing from people and hearing with our heart, that we're not just hearing in ways where everything is about how do we make the most effective this or the most effective that, like actually hearing people's struggles and hearing what's going on for people. There's a man who I really love, and he talks about the difference between listening and hearing, that like listening is the activity of opening up our ears, but hearing is actually where there's an outcome, where something has happened. And I think that's maybe important as well, that it's the listening, but also that we've understood what it is that somebody wants us to actually hear as well. So
that's amazing.
I'd love to hear from both of you as well. And like, what do you sense in the community, and what do you think is coming up for women and for mothers? I suppose, for me, I suppose the interest is always mothers and that as well. Or do you sense there's a difference between women and mothers?
There definitely is in regards to mothers. Even up here a lot, we'd see a lot of women, you know, even in regards to accessing meetings and things like that. And even down to how they feel, like they're so conscious of the baby crying and stuff like that. There's not enough of that up here, so that'd be a barrier then for a lot of the women, especially up here, that'd want to go to meetings, so they feel like they don't have childcare, they don't have things. And then even in and around childcare, even people that want to access the day programme, there's not enough childcare places in the area. There's just not. We have a lot of barriers up our way, don't we? We really do.
That was actually, you're reminding me as well of a lady that I met from this area who, she was able to access childcare, but not for the amount of time that would create for the day programme. So it wasn't even just about, here's your childcare now. It was actually understanding how the services connected, that she could actually be facilitated to do that as well. And the stress.
Because it's so individual around every single, so it's not just like mothers in recovery or women in recovery, it's individual to every person. It's such an individual case, so it has to be looked at so individually and specifically, and what might suit one mother might suit another mother and another woman, and so on and so on. So that's probably a huge piece that has to be looked at.
It's not one size kind of fits all. You're absolutely right. 100%.
Not one size fits all. Everyone, even in life in general, everyone has such specific needs that they need, like,
And I think as well, you know, it's like what you were saying there, you know, the childcare and stuff like that. It's the, you know, bringing them in, the kids crying. Sorry.
Literally, one, like, as I was saying about, there's not one specific need for everything. Like don't think they can say every woman in recovery, this is what we're going to do. So I don't know how they're going to fix all that, or like, I know obviously pieces of work need to be done, but they can't say, right, so for mothers in recovery and women in recovery, we're going to do this. They have to do a lot of work around it, and it is. I definitely do not think there's enough. Like, it's so important what you do and what yourself does on, because there's not enough information. It's not, there's just not enough. There's not enough research been done on it, or maybe there is, but there's not enough been spoken about. So I think things like this are so important. And then
it comes with its own set of challenges as well, you know. So when you look at like the barriers, say for childcare, or whether it be payments or, you know, whatever that is, the stigma, or that comes with its own set of challenges internally as well. You know, I mean, I've spoken to women, I've been one. I've been a woman in early recovery, you know, where it's like you have to be home with your children. Not you have to be, you choose to be. Yeah. My children are like yourselves, my whole world, you know, that way. So you choose to be home with your children, but that doesn't stop you comparing yourself, you know, to other people, or, you know, or being judged, you know, being judged about not getting enough meetings, or, you know, what are you doing for your recovery? Or, I know I found that really difficult in the beginning, you know. It was like, oh, I have to be here with my children, you know, and they're, so then that brings a new challenge, which is an internal one of, you know, oh, I can't do this, or I don't have anybody, or look at so-and-so, they can do it, and they're getting 7 meetings a week and I only got 1, and so that brings a whole new.
It does, because then you're putting on them feelings on yourself, like, I'm not good enough for that, like, or I'm not doing as much as they're doing, and then, like you said, that's a whole internal battle.
Which takes a toll then on your self-worth, your confidence, and I mean, that's a struggle, you know, being in recovery. I mean, you're fighting to retrieve all those things and to build all those things up. So, you know, it's like if you have them being chipped away at, you know, in recovery, it's like, it makes it twice as hard, you know, twice as difficult, like, you know.
I really appreciate as well what you were bringing up there as well, Linda, about the differences and the importance, I think, of looking at each person as a human being, because I suppose even what I noticed out here was, like, each of the women had their own individual struggles. Some it was stuff around housing, some it was stuff around childcare, some of it was stuff around stigma, some of it was stuff, I suppose, around custody with children and access and stuff. So I think it's really important that we don't just say, okay, actually the solution is this and we're going to do that and that's it. Actually, it needs to be person to person and really listen to people. Is it okay if I ask you, as well, I suppose, one of the things I'd love to hear your opinions on is, I've been looking at women's experiences around the world, like in recovery, mothers' experiences, I suppose I should say, in recovery. And there's kind of a number of things that felt like people don't talk about or recognise for mothers in recovery, but that actually felt like they were really different and really important, like for mothers. Like, I think the fact that if women are going through custody things, there's huge grief that can come with that separation, that I think women and mothers in particular often have to deal with a lot of those processes, because stuff comes back to the mother, I suppose, to deal with a lot of that, and that, you know, that's something I think about. And I suppose I wonder as well about trauma, like whether trauma is always recognised, whether places are trauma informed, because I suppose something that definitely came up in that as well was, like, for women and mothers, there seems to be a lot of pain that people have experienced, and how is that recognised? And even, I suppose, in terms of like bonding with kids and supporting, going back to that mothering piece, like sometimes those separations, being even in recovery and the ups and downs and stuff, like how are we actually supporting women and mothers, not judging, like actually supporting? Because something that I've got, like, as well from talking to mothers, is that they really care about their kids, and actually how can we be in that care with them rather than, I suppose, judging stuff like in that as well. So I don't know if that resonates or what you think, or of those kind of struggles and that as well. So
I have just from my own experience of the medication that I was on. Was that okay to say? About methadone? I was on methadone for 22 years before I came into recovery, and like being so highly medicated, you can't feel. So I think that's the importance, such importance. You know, day programs and other women's. Now, don't mind, you can cut this bit out. But it was actually when I was on the day program, my own self. There was another. Will I just say yourself? Because it was Donna, right? Yeah. So I'll just say it. But I don't know. You might want to cut it out. But it was actually Donna. I'd come up to, and I was saying, when I'm around my kids, like I actually said this in my interview up here as well. Like when I came up here, do you know, being clean with substance free and my kids hugging me and all, it felt off, like, and then you feel so guilty saying that. It's like you don't know how to hug your kids, you don't know how to be around them because you're only getting to know them. And someone been able to identify with that. And I remember Donna, like, obviously she was a facilitator, and she pulled me and she was like, that's so normal. So see, having it normalised how we're feeling is a huge thing for someone to say, absolutely, I've been there, I've done that. And then the guilt as well, all that comes up when someone can identify with that and recognise it. And then it's like, right, it's kind of like, right, now I don't feel as bad, and you don't feel as, because somebody else is telling you that's normal. That like to normalise how we feel instead of judging it. Absolutely. I think. Yeah. Yeah. It's like you're being heard. Yeah. You're being identified with. Yeah. Makes all the difference. Oh, it really does. Yeah.
Yeah. And I suppose what that kind of brings back for me is like, there's also this, probably going on too much about feminist things, but I love feminist research, where they talk about intensive motherhood, and that there can be these expectations in society that people are the perfect mother and whatever else. And actually, like, research would show that it's normal that there's rupture and repair, that people go through breaks and then you repair and things happen. I mean, there's days where I remember when my son was a baby and my daughter was coming over, and I had this complete aversion to being touched, because I was like, I actually can't handle another child touching me, and we had to go through like a phase, like, and I felt the guilt I felt as a mother. But I don't think, even as mothers and as women, I don't think we talk about these things enough, and that makes it harder than like when anybody is struggling. And I suppose when there's so much fear and judgment around addiction and stuff as well, I think it becomes even harder again, and that's not okay.
No, it's because there's also, what I found over the years, there's also a stigma against not being the perfect mother. You know, that kind of way. So it's like, you know, I think you and me spoke about this before, Louise. You know, it's like in early recovery for me, it'd be like, I can't say that I ordered a takeaway twice this week, or you know, that kind of way. Or it's like, you know, and then you're trying to justify that in your own head to not feel as guilty. Well, I must have been in college, or it would have been college at the time. You know, I must have been in college, but still having that shame around, you know, not and like not saying, yeah, no, I ordered it. Now it'd be like, yeah, I ordered a takeaway twice this week. You know, that way, because I remember my mum saying something to me, and it has stuck with me to this day. I think I was telling you this. I don't know what I was saying to her. I was saying, I feel like a really bad mum, like, because you have it, that mammy guilt. It's very, very real. And I remember my ma saying to me, you know, a bad mother will never ask themselves, are they a bad mother? Because they don't care. I remember coming away and thinking to myself, that actually is brilliant. You know, only a good mother will question whether they're a good mother or not. You know, that way. And that's kind of stuck with me.
That. Yeah, I do love that.
But like that kind of perfection thing, it's like a perception of perfection that you need to kind of have, you know. And I had it myself for years. It'd be like, you know, the house had to be perfect, and there isn't. No. And I think again, that's that expectation of, well, if you don't do it a certain way, or you don't have your home a certain way, or you don't go on 2 holidays a year with your kids, or, you know, then you're not a good mother, which is like, you know, it's shite, like, you know, of course.
Yeah, we didn't know, it's all good.
Asking me not to course for like a half an hour is a challenge. But so it's like there's all of that kind of stuff. So it's for, you know, when I look at it as a whole, it's not just the, you know, the very obvious barriers of childcare or stigma, or you know whether it be payments because you've special needs. It's not just those obvious ones, it's the internal ones as well. Actually, I probably would have struggled more with them myself, with the internal ones, than I would have with the external ones. if I'm honest.
But if they could find the link to the X, so people could actually access
100%.
all them things,
100%.
then the link is to the internal things, because you
100%.
can't do that internal work if you're not linked into some type of a place.
No, it's a great point, yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that was something actually that really stood out to me in the first report that we did, where we talked about tending the fire within and tending the fire among. It's like, and I suppose it brings back even stigma for me. What you receive from other people is sometimes the voice that you'll talk with yourself. So like stigma isn't just something that happens out here. Actually, it can be held. Like you can hold on to that. Like whether that's, and stigma isn't always professionals. It can be family. It can be society. It can be like lots of different things. So like I think it's important to recognise that. And how do we actually like, that was actually one of the things that I really, really learned, I suppose, working, like, you know, as part of that with all of you and learning together, was that recovery isn't actually just about giving up the drug. It's about yourself and how you relate to yourself. And all of that piece is so important. And part of that when you're a mother is also, like, you know, that piece around being a mother. It's not like you're trying to hold both. You're trying to be a woman, but also part of yourself is being a mother and stuff as well. So
Absolutely. And it's the whole lot, you know, it's like, and I'm not slating men now when I say this, I'm not slating men, but it's like, you know, a man comes into recovery and it's like, you know, like I even remember back, you know, what was I saying?
About men. And you're not slating men.
Yeah, no, and I'm not slating men, but it is easier 90% of the time for a man to go into recovery, for a man to access residential, for a man to access a day programme, you know, that kind of stuff is a lot easier. But when it comes to a mother trying to do that, like even me trying to get on a Zoom like call, it's like an extreme sport. Like most days, it's like it's really, really difficult.
It as well, Ma.
You know,
Ma.
It is. It's like,
Away, please.
and you're going, you know, and you're turning your camera off and turning it back on. And I was actually doing a course there, me masters in the Reiki, and we had like 2 hour long or 2.5 hour long Zoom calls, and you know, it started off like on the Zoom, and you know, my daughter would walk in, she'd go, "You're on your Zoom call." And then half an hour later she'd come back in, she'd go, "Still on?" And I'd be like, "Yeah." And then she'd go back out, and then eventually it was like, "You're going to be on that," you know. So it's like you're turning like you're putting the camera on, putting the camera off, you're pressing the camera to the ceiling so you can it's like an extreme sport. You know, but so it is. I think it's much more difficult for mothers coming into recovery, you know.
Definitely.
I wanted to pick up on something you said there as well, because I think that whole thing of residential is hugely important too. I think it's great that we have a space where women can bring their kids. However, it's only up to a certain age. The other thing that's really stood out to me is that I suppose sometimes in recovery you have to walk away from your support networks, and as a mother that can really isolate you because you're dependent on them potentially for your kids. So childcare isn't just about a space where you get a day program. Sometimes it's actually even like getting some sense of relief, not being on your own, not being isolated, and I suppose that can really isolate mothers, I think, and that as well. So that kind of just came into my mind as you were talking.
No, 100%. And look, I think, you know, up here as well, even in TRP, we'd be very passionate about that as well, you know, and we see it. We see the gap that's there, you know, that needs to be bridged for the women. And you know, like last Friday, we were here last, oh no, it was the Friday before, I think, we were up here, you know, and the women can bring their children up on a Friday evening, you know, and like the laugh we had, it was just something so simple. We were sitting here all in a row, you know, all in a circle, playing 5-second rule. Hilarious game, by the way, if you get a chance to play it. But you know, and the kids were there, and you know, and it's lovely. And I remember when I was in early recovery, like I would have killed for that, you know, that way, just that hour, just that, you know, that bit of space where you can actually go and just sit and have a laugh, you know, just not take life so serious, just go up and play a few games and have the chats, and you know, and it really fills your little cup up, you know, that way. You need that kind of connection. So it's really good that they can do that. The women can bring their children up here in the evening, you know, that way. So it's important.
Absolutely. I'm terrible. I keep on talking now.
No,
I feel like I
go
need
ahead.
to shut up. The other thing I knew there was another point that I wanted to say as well when you were talking about it, and it's not to diss men, but there is a different societal expectation around mothers than there is to fathers.
Oh, absolutely.
It's like working in this area, sometimes I see in policy, it's like, let's get father involvement, and it's like this amazing thing, we'll get father involvement. Whereas for mothers, it's like, it's more accountability, and have mothers done this, and what's happened, like, and I suppose some of the literature would talk about how mothers are held responsible for their child well-being, and it's like the mother's well-being though then isn't always held, and I think in recovery that's a huge issue, because your well-being and yourself, as we said earlier, is such an important part, and I don't think that same pressure is put on men as it is on women to be responsible for your child's well-being. So.
No, and you're right. It's not, you know, if you look at even, you know, like it's that thing, isn't it, of, you know, well, why did you let your child do that? Or, you know, with a parent-teacher meeting, it's like you're going up to the parent-teacher, and that's not to say that, you know, there's a lot of fathers that will do that kind of stuff, you know, that way, but you're right, the expectation is probably 90% on the woman, and that is like, I mean, that's very stressful. It's very, very stressful, and I know I struggle. And I remember having this conversation with you in early recovery. It was like this balancing act. It was like I still haven't got a proper balance, you know, that way, of everything in life. But it's like, and I don't think anyone ever does.
No,
I think you're kind of always. But I remember in early recovery being so overwhelmed of, like, you know, right, we have to get that thing of, you have to get like 4 meetings a week because you were told you have to get 4 meetings a week, and then it's like, no, but you also have to go to your aftercare, and you also have to, and it's just like, how am I going to do all this, you know, that way? And it's like, then you're not spending enough time with your children. It's like, well, why aren't you spending enough time with your children? And, you know, it's tough. It's tough to try and balance all that kind of stuff out.
Absolutely.
You know?
And you're actually thinking about gaps and blocks again. You're reminding me of another lady I met who talked about being in that early point of recovery, and suddenly her children were back in her care, so her kids hadn't been in her care, and it was like going from 0 to 100, and like it was too much too soon, and like, I mean, that's one of the things I remember really sticking with me as well, like, how do we really hold people that they can hold their recovery, they can be the best they can be, so that they, in turn, that you can give that to your child, because you can't pour from an empty cup, so it's like, you know, how do you hold that?
Sorry for interrupting, it's like what Donna was saying there as well, it's them expectations, because if you're in and around that, and then you hear people, they're after getting the, as I said, that's why it's so individual. You hear people, I'm after getting my children back, so then like, right, so now I'm in recovery, I need to get, but it's so individual, like you mightn't be ready to get your children back, you might, you know, there's so many other things before that, and then some people do jump into it, and like you said, you can't pour from an empty cup. That's why we stress the importance of self-care and self-love, because you need that yourself, and because you're so drained from being a mother, you know, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, physically. You need to keep filling yourself in order to be able to look after your children and all. And when you're doing that on your own, it's very, very hard.
Absolutely. You're bringing up another thing for me, where one of the things that really stood out in our process was women talking about losing yourself. And I suppose something that really stood out in that for me is, if you've lost yourself, how do you care for yourself? Because you're disconnected from that compassion and love, and maybe even sense of you and your needs and what's important for you. So for me, there's a huge part of recovery, potentially, I suppose I don't want to put words in your mouth, like, but what really stood out to me was a huge part maybe where it is learning to care for yourself, like, because if you're then suddenly given to your child, like, you know, you're back into that space, because I think being a mother, and I feel it myself, like I felt like, oh my God, like, who am I anymore, what's going on, because everything then can get so focused on the child, and how do we get that balance? So.
We do a lot of stuff up here, and like, you know, with the participants and stuff, on self-care, on self-love. We do aftercare as well. I'd run different things. Like, we do stress, don't we, Donna, the importance of self-care, self-love, all that to pour into yourself as well first. Obviously, everyone else needs to be poured into, but you can't do that if you're on empty. You can't.
Yeah. And how do we care and show love to each other? Because I do think there's a piece, like, I remember one of the ladies, it really stood out to me as well, like, I suppose that she had a very difficult childhood, and how do you show love to yourself if you haven't experienced that? How do you know even what that is or how to do it? So I do think there's a piece around how we actually hold each other, that things aren't just put on people as individuals, as groups and as people in society. How we relate and hold each other is so important to create those potentials for each other as well.
But I think as well that kind of goes into the importance of breaking down some of those biases, and a lot of that stigma. We have gotten better, granted we have, but the importance of breaking that down is because I think with a lot of people, I know I was listening to a podcast, and like the way in which they were speaking about people in addiction, it actually, like, it boiled me blood. And it was only when I'd finished listening, I carried it for the day. I actually carried the resentment for the day. I was like, you know, I couldn't wrap my head around how somebody could actually speak in such derogatory terms about another human being. And when I calmed down, I was kind of thinking, okay, it's lack of education, it's lack of awareness, it's, you know, they're coming from a place of, you know, not really understanding what addiction is, not really understanding, you know, because there was a comment made in it about a woman and her child, you know, and I'm not even going to repeat it, but it boiled my blood. And I was like, but it's really lack of education, it's lack of understanding, you know, and I think that kind of stuff could be worked on a lot more. I think I remember saying it to you before. I don't even know whether I can say this or not, but I'm going to say it. I think it was around, you know, if I actually had my way, every Garda, every doctor, every nurse, every TUSLA employee, everybody dealing with the public like that would have like even a level 5 addiction studies, because I think, you know, it's if you don't have education around it and you're kind of ignorant to it, the chances are you are going to come at it from a more, you know, judgment than empathy, you know, that way. But
because so many people out there think, and I would have even taught myself when I was on substances, like what you said at the beginning, Louise, when you come in, it's just about stopping using. Little do you know then, that's when the actual work starts. 100%. That's the easy bit. Like that, although it's hard, but that's the simple little bit. Then it's your left drug-free to have to deal with all everything you've suppressed, and all that comes up, all the behaviours you're in, that you've been unaware of, every single little thing, and people have no understanding. So they're like, why can't she just stop using? Little do they know, if she just stops using and does not work on herself, she'll be a million times worse. Do you know what I mean? Like, so hard, so complex.
And then I think, going back to what we talked about at the beginning, I think absolutely education is important, but for me education is important because it opens up dialogue for people to communicate, because you can't mandate empathy and understanding. As much as we want people to do a course, they'll get it in their head, they'll understand whatever. Sometimes what can happen is maybe somebody grew up with a parent who was in addiction themselves. They're holding on to those experiences. Maybe they viewed something. There's all sorts of things, and I suppose we exist in that wildness of life, like we said, and you're going to have some people, it's going to take longer, and I think it's actually through dialogue that things like that can get broken down. And I think that's the depth, like, that we really need to go into as society, where we're talking about these things, we're hearing experiences, we're opening up spaces to listen, inviting people in to listen more and more through education and through conversations and things.
Absolutely.
as well.
And I think as well, you know, I love being part of TRP, and I think, you know, the different types of things that we do up here, like the Tallaght Theatre and the Civic, and, you know, the connecting communities, and all those things contribute towards breaking that stigma. They contribute to highlighting that this is actually recovery, you know, that way. And it's like some of the best people I know are in recovery, you know, that way. So I think that's really important to try and
And I suppose what that kind of signals for me as well is that, like, sometimes we talk about recovery as if it's this individual thing on an individual person, but what's also really stood out to me is how other people can either nurture that or how they can, like, one comment where somebody doesn't believe in you or really puts you down can actually be such a huge trigger. So actually, as communities and people together, we all have a responsibility for how we hold people around recovery, and not just pushing people, oh, you're the person with whatever. Now I get when people are, you know, sometimes we need to have boundaries and we need to hold stuff, and we all have our limits, so like absolutely, but I think we do need to
not ostracise them.
Absolutely.
I totally agree. I totally agree.
Yeah.
Okay, Louise, thank you so much for coming up.
Sorry, I feel like I talk way too much.
No, you did not. It was a pleasure having you here. I love working with you.
I love working with you.
I love working with you. And just thank you so much for coming up. Is there anything you wanted to say before we wrapped up? Or?
The only other thing I was just thinking might be helpful to say is just to mention that we're in processes with TUSLA at the moment, which has been really positive and something that's been really welcomed. I think also noting that I suppose 5 of the women in the process wrote letters, which we've now published, and as part of when they were read out at our first report, people from TUSLA and the Department of Health and that wrote letters in response, which they read out on the day, and I think it's a really positive step that we're now continuing that process with TUSLA and some of the senior managers. So I just want to recognise the work that's happened, and also recognise that we're doing things around that, and maybe at some point we can have a chat about that, maybe, or that as well, because I think there's a huge piece around TUSLA and working with that, but then how do we notice the strengths even with them that we can nurture that and grow that as well.
No, 100%, that's great, Louise, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, and thank you, Donna, as well.
Thanks, guys, that's a wrap, Patrick.
That's a wrap.